The Mongol composite bow. Few people realize that a bow barely 3 feet long helped build the largest land empire in human history. And according to some Persian chroniclers, a single Mongol arrow volley could drop more men in minutes than an entire infantry line in a full day of fighting. The Mongol composite bow was a medieval anomaly. Light, short, quiet, yet powerful enough to punch through wooden shields from over 160 yards away and tear into lamellar armor with unnerving ease. Its triple-layer construction of wood, horn, and sinew stored energy like a coiled beast ready to strike. And when it struck, the results were devastating. But the real terror wasn't the bow. It was the archer behind it. Mongol riders fired at full gallop, twisting their bodies backward in the saddle as if defying the laws of motion. In some battles, each horse archer could unleash 6 arrows per minute, creating lethal storms that shredded larger armies before they even understood what was happening. Enemies rarely saw the attacker, only the aftermath. And that was the turning point. Warfare that once relied on armor, mass, and shield walls suddenly bowed to mobility, range, and precision. The composite bow rewrote the playbook of warfare from the steppes to the Middle East, collapsing kingdoms without long sieges or brutal hand-to-hand clashes. It was the triumph of speed over strength, engineering over brute force. In the end, this small curved bow proved a brutal lesson to the world. The deadliest weapon doesn't need to be heavy, just fast enough to reach you before you realize you're in danger. Medieval plate armor. When Europe finally mastered the art of shaping steel as if it were molten clay, a creation emerged so resilient that chroniclers swore they saw knights take dozens of blows without falling. The full suit of plate armor. Forged by the master armorers of 14th and 15th century Germany and Italy, this armor was a metallurgical masterpiece. Every component, breastplate, pauldrons, gauntlets, greave, was fitted with near-surgical precision to the knight's body, turning him into something halfway between a man and a living statue. Milanese workshops, especially the famed Misaglia family, became legendary for crafting suits so perfectly tailored they seemed to seal around the warrior like a gleaming second skin. And the impact was colossal. For the first time, a fighter could advance against swords, lances, and arrows without fearing instant death. There are accounts of German knights enduring entire volleys of English longbows and still pushing forward. Plate armor rewired the logic of medieval combat. Battle became shock, weight, momentum. A fully armored knight could dominate close-quarters fighting, bowling over lesser protected foes as if they were made of cloth. But nothing remains invincible forever. Once European firearms spread, especially the muskets of the 16th century, steel stopped being synonymous with survival. The very plates that once turned aside arrows were now punched through by lead balls traveling with brutal force. What had been a symbol of unstoppable power became dead weight and an expensive liability. Siege cannons. There are accounts claiming a single shot from certain Ottoman Renaissance cannons could turn tons of stone into dust, as if a thunderclap had detonated inside the wall itself. Siege cannons were the first true rupture between medieval defense and early modern offense. Cast in bronze or massive sections of wrought iron, these monsters didn't lob stones in graceful arcs like trebuchets. They obliterated whatever they hit. Gunpowder ignited in milliseconds, unleashing a shockwave that hurled stone or metal balls forward with violent, earth-shaking force. A well-placed shot didn't just crack a wall, it ripped entire chunks out of it, leaving craters where centuries-old fortifications once stood proud. The strategic shock was immediate. Walls that had resisted arrows, spears, and boulders for hundreds of years collapsed after only a few dozen blasts. In 1453, during the siege of Constantinople, Ottoman Maj cannons over 25 feet long fired stone projectiles weighing over 1,000 pounds straight into the Theodosian walls. Every impact was a localized earthquake, a sound that announced the death of the medieval world. But the most unsettling legacy of siege cannons was philosophical. They introduced the idea that no human-built barrier was permanent. Gunpowder turned war into chemistry, metallurgy, and physics. Less heroism, more calculated force. European muskets. The European musket launched an entirely new logic of warfare. Suddenly, lineage didn't matter, childhood training didn't matter, and the shine of your armor meant nothing. What mattered was the blast, the smoke, and the lead. Heavy, awkward, slow to reload, and far from accurate, a musket still held a power that rewrote centuries of military tradition. A single lead ball could punch through plate armor that had once been displayed as invincible, instantly redefining who was vulnerable and who controlled the field. And the statistical impact was brutal. At Pavia, 1525, chroniclers wrote of entire ranks of knights collapsing under coordinated musket volleys, something unthinkable a century earlier. The old choreography of shot combat gave way to geometric discipline, firing lines, rotating ranks, volleys timed like clockwork. The elegance of lances and cavalry charges was replaced by the mechanical thunder of gunpowder. More than a weapon, the musket was a social equalizer. A peasant trained for a few weeks could kill an aristocratic warrior who had spent a lifetime mastering the sword. Military power shifted, and with it the politics and foundations of the modern European world. The Maxim machine gun. Some numbers are so terrifying they almost don't look real. On certain World War I fronts, a single British-positioned Maxim could cut down more than 500 men in under 10 minutes, a killing efficiency no previous weapon in human history had ever approached. The Maxim was the first true automatic weapon on the battlefield. It wasn't just fast, it was relentless. Designed by Hiram Maxim and first adopted by the British Empire, the gun used its own recoil to cycle the next round, turning gunpowder into a cold, mechanical heartbeat. It spat 500 to 600 rounds per minute, running like a steel metronome. For the first time, a handful of men could stop the advance of hundreds, and it rewired the very logic of war. The frontal assault, a tactic used for thousands of years, became a death sentence overnight. Where battles once hinged on shock and courage, they now revolved around rhythm and volume. The trench systems of Europe were born from this terror. If moving forward meant dying, then soldiers dug in and stayed low. At the Somme, German troops firing captured Maxims reduced entire waves of infantry to silhouettes dissolving in the smoke. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a revelation, or a warning. The Maxim became the icon of industrial war. It was the machine that looked at the soldier and saw only statistics. TNT and dynamite. When Alfred Nobel stabilized nitroglycerin and created dynamite, the world realized that an innocent-looking stick could unleash enough energy to erase tons of rock in a single violent snap. Patented in 1867, dynamite wasn't designed as a weapon, but war never ignores a good explosion. With Nobel's invention, armies suddenly had a portable, storable, and brutally effective means of destruction. It was easy to stockpile, easy to trigger, and devastating against bunkers, trenches, and fortified positions. Place a yellow stick in the right spot, and an entire slice of terrain simply changed shape. But the real leap came with TNT, synthesized in the late 19th century and first adopted by the German Empire. Unlike dynamite, TNT didn't explode from heat, shock, or rough handling, which meant it could be shaped into grenades, artillery shells, demolition charges, and everything in between. It became the explosive heart of the 20th century. Its chemistry was so reliable that it practically defined modern warfare, stable to transport, predictable on detonation, and strong enough to rip structures in half or vaporize anything unlucky enough to be nearby. And the strategic effect was massive. Fortifications that once required days of bombardment could be destroyed with a handful of well-placed charges. Bridges, tunnels, railways, nothing was safe. Dynamite and TNT blurred the line between engineering and warfare, crossing effortlessly from construction sites to battlefields. Mark I tank. In 1916, when the first Mark I crawled across the mud-soaked fields of the Somme, German soldiers wrote that it looked like a moving iron house, and that nothing they carried could stop it. The Mark I, built by the British, was the direct answer to the nightmare of trench warfare. The Western Front had frozen in place, a wasteland of mud, machine guns, and barbed wire. Infantrymen were being slaughtered before they could even see the enemy. And then came this strange beast, armored, painfully slow, hotter than a furnace inside, but capable of crossing trenches, crushing obstacles, and spitting fire from its side-mounted machine guns. It was part farm tractor, part land ship, part steamroller, born from desperation, not elegance. Its impact was immediate. The very idea of a vehicle that could ignore machine gun fire and keep moving under artillery changed the psychology of the battlefield. It wasn't perfect. It bogged down constantly, overheated its crews, and barely managed 4 miles per hour. But the moment it appeared, the terrain itself stopped being a wall. The trenches that had held Europe hostage for years suddenly had a natural predator. The sight of a Mark I emerging through the fog, grinding, rattling, shaking like a mechanical animal, shattered morale. Entire units abandoned positions at the mere silhouette of that armored giant, as if the earth itself had grown teeth and stood up to attack. And that was the birth of the tank age, with a machine that wasn't pretty, wasn't fast, but was powerful enough to rewrite the battlefield forever. U-boat submarines. There are reports that during certain phases of World War I, German U-boats sank so many ships that nearly a third of all British cargo simply vanished into the Atlantic. U-boats were Germany's silent weapon, machines built to turn the ocean itself into enemy territory. With reinforced hulls and dual engines, diesel on the surface, electric underwater, they could slip beneath the waves and move unseen, surfacing only to strike. Their torpedoes, metal spears packed with explosives, were almost impossible to detect in time. When they hit, there wasn't a battle. There was just a blast, a column of water, and a ship splitting in half. They completely rewrote the rules of naval warfare. Before U-boats, controlling the sea meant having the biggest fleet. After U-boats, it meant fearing what you couldn't see. British convoys had to be invented just to survive them. New technologies like hydrophones and depth charges emerged solely to hunt them. It was a predator's war fought in darkness, and the quieter you were, the deadlier you became. But the psychological impact was even greater. Sailors lived with the constant fear of an attack that gave no warning. No gunfire, no silhouette on the horizon, just the sudden roar of an explosion. And U-boat captains knew they controlled the most dangerous factor in ocean warfare: surprise. Mustard gas. In certain World War I assaults, German mustard gas caused so many casualties that a single drifting cloud could incapacitate thousands, without ever revealing where it came from. Mustard gas didn't kill with explosions or penetration. It killed with time. First deployed on a massive scale by Germany in 1917, it acted like a slow poison, burning the skin, blinding the eyes, tearing apart the respiratory system, and it didn't need to be inhaled. Touching clothing, settling on damp trench walls, lingering in humid air, its reach was everywhere. Nearly colorless and almost odorless, it spread silently like a chemical shadow. Its impact was horrific. Standard gas masks were useless. Many soldiers went blind within minutes. Field hospitals overflowed with men covered in massive blisters, coughing blood, begging for air. For the first time in history, an enemy could win a battle without firing a shot, simply by poisoning the atmosphere itself. Strategically and psychologically, mustard gas changed everything. Defensive positions became death traps. Entire trench lines had to be abandoned, and its existence forced the world to create chemical warfare doctrines, new treaties, and emergency protection measures. Even today, the name alone sends a chill. With mustard gas, war revealed its darkest truth. Victory didn't always require strength. Sometimes it only required poisoning the air your enemy breathed. B-29 Superfortress. In 1945, a single B-29 mission over Tokyo unleashed so much destruction that more than 6 square miles of the city were reduced to ash in one night, a scale of fire no weapon on the ground could ever match. The B-29 Superfortress, built by the United States, was the pinnacle of strategic aviation in World War II. It flew higher, faster, and farther than any bomber that came before it thanks to a fully pressurized cabin, massive engines, and a range that stretched across entire oceans. It carried several tons of bombs, cruised above the reach of most anti-aircraft guns, and crossed the Pacific without needing an escort. For its time, it was quite literally a fortress in the sky, and its presence reshaped the war in the Pacific. B-29s carried out thousands of attacks on Japan, destroying factories, infrastructure, and entire urban districts. Their combination of high-altitude reach and enormous payload let the U.S. redraw the battlefield map from the air alone. In some missions, hundreds of superfortresses bombed simultaneously, wiping out entire neighborhoods within minutes. The psychological and strategic impact was overwhelming. For the first time, a nation could be threatened not by armies marching on its borders, but by machines that appeared from 30,000 feet, invisible until the bombs were already falling. And at the peak of their history, two specific B-29s, Enola Gay and Boxcar, delivered the weapons that ended the war entirely. This video ended up longer than I expected, and I wouldn't be able to edit it in time for the planned release date. But if you enjoyed it and want a part 2, leave a comment below. I'll gladly bring you a second part. If you made it all the way here, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. See you in the next one.